Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi, and I'm real excited today because when you think of WFAN, you cannot talk about WFAN without talking about today's guest. He's been a part of the station for 29 years. Um, Basically, he was there through everything you could think of: the Yankees run, the Knicks teams in the late 90s. I mean, everything you could imagine, he was around for it. Mike and the Mad Dog. Sommers and Salzburg, everything. I mean, he's just been a cornerstone of that station forever, and we're real honored to have him on today, the one and only Rich Ackerman. And Rich, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor for me.
Thanks, Mike. Just don't make me cry. I always say I'm like Dick Vermeil. I get very emotional, but thank you for all the accolades.
No problem. So, Rich, let me ask you this: as a young kid, did you enjoy sports as a young kid? I mean,
Oh
like,
yeah.
did you have like a athlete that you admired, a team that you loved? Talk about that a little bit.
Steve Garvey was my guy. He
Wow.
was the guy. The Dodgers were so good in the mid late 70s and into the early 80s, and Garvey was in the lineup every day. He had a streak for over 1,000 consecutive games played. At one point, before Cal Ripken, he was the guy that people said, could he catch Lou Gehrig's record? It didn't work out that way, of course, but Garvey was a Hollywood-like figure, and of course, he played in L.A. On one of the most successful teams of the 1970s, and put up great numbers, was an all-star every year at a position in which there were so many good players, whether it was Pete Rose playing first base late in the 70s, Tony Perez on the Big Red Machine, Willie McCovey, Keith Hernandez with the Cardinals back then. So he was my guy. That was the guy I loved. I loved all sports. I loved playing baseball the most. Walt Frazier was another one. Clyde was my first introduction to basketball were the championship teams of the Knicks. I was a little too young for 70, 73. I was still very young, but I certainly had figured it all out by then. But Walt Frazier and Steve Garvey, those were my two guys.
Right. And interestingly enough, Rich, around the time when Steve Garvey played for the Dodgers, it's not like it is today. You could watch any team you want between the baseball network, the baseball package, ESPN, Fox, whatever it might be. But a lot of times, if people who lived in New York City, they really didn't see a player like Garvey unless he was playing the Mets, if he was playing the Yankees in the World Series, maybe TBS with the Braves and stuff. So when you did get to see these players and you knew it wasn't that often, you really wanted to make sure you didn't miss a game when they were playing the locals.
No, without question. I tried to get tickets for the Dodgers every year they were in town, and also game of the week. Saturday afternoon, you were glued to that TV. As a matter of fact, I know I'm dating myself by saying this, but you'd go. Usually, game of the week started about 2:20. The pregame show would be at 2, and 2:20 would usually be about first pitch. Maybe it was 3 in some weeks, whatever the case may be. But you were. You go play ball in the morning and 1:30, 1:45, you got in front of that TV just to make sure it started okay and warmed up. I know a lot of people won't get that phrase, but you had to warm up the TV a little, and you sat there waiting for the game to start on NBC. So as you said, there weren't a lot of opportunities to see players back then. So you follow the box scores very closely. Game of the week, if they were in town, and for the Dodgers, they were in the playoffs a lot in the 70s.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's one of the things today, Rich. And listen, I'm sure for the kids that are growing up in this era right now, they love baseball like I did growing up in the 80s. But the things that I miss, like, I mean, I think of This Week in Baseball and how exciting that was to watch on Sundays right
Another show,
before.
you were at the
Yeah.
TV set 10 minutes before, and you couldn't wait for
Yeah.
that opening dun dun
Oh
dun
yeah, and
dun.
then even the ending, the closing,
Oh,
where they're
absolutely.
showing highlights of different players you love watching, and I just feel like they kind of went away from that over the last several years. Like I don't feel like we get that same baseball feeling anymore. Like I still love baseball. Don't get me wrong. It's my favorite sport, but it definitely isn't the same as it was to me the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
Well, I think a lot of things happen. Technology, unfortunately, could be a double-edged sword. That's one. And with the fact that you can get any game now, you alluded to it before, you can get any game anytime. So if you liked Steve Garvey, now you don't have to wait. You could see Steve Garvey any day you want. So I think that's one thing. I think two for me, as far as baseball is concerned, I really think, and I understand why they do it, but the Saturday afternoon games, that to me was always great.
Yeah.
Whether as you were watching the game or wanted to go to the game, tickets back when I was a kid were much different. They were single digits in terms of price. So under $10, you can get a ticket to the game and you could be happy, spend an afternoon at the ballpark. So, but I still love the Saturday afternoon. That with the 110 or 135 starts. To me, that's really great. You get sunshine and a warm day. To me, you can't beat that.
No, not at all. And Rich, let me ask you this. We'll get to like where you started in radio, but what I wanted to ask you was, I mean, did you even like say in high school have any like inkling that you might want to do radio? I mean, listen,
Yes,
you did,
is the
yeah,
answer.
because like
I didn't
anything
know if I
else,
would do it, but I definitely knew I wanted to.
yeah, and like anything else, Rich, like I think about when I would listen to radio, like probably like when I was out of high school, because when you're in high school, you're more for the music, but when you get a little older, you want to listen to, WFAN, or you want to listen to WCBS, things like that. And the thing of it is like there's something about radio that's magical. Like when you're listening to people talk, like you can't see them, but like they paint the picture no matter what it is, whether it's calling play by play, whether it's talking about how the Jets did last night or something like that. There's just something about radio that I think is very special. And it's it's a lot different from TV, but in a lot of ways, like I always like listening to radio, especially a baseball game when it came to announcers more than TV. And that's no knock at them. There's just something about radio that's magical.
Yeah, especially in baseball. And I'm not sure how or why that is, but more than any other sport, I think baseball is the epitome of a person sitting on his front porch or back porch and just having the game on in the background. And for me, for some reason, still, even as technology has changed everything, baseball and radio still seem magical. But you're right. I think there definitely is an intimacy when it comes to radio. Look, this is no knock on TV, but when you have TV, you have people dressed nicely. You have makeup people, you have camera people, you have an audio person, and there's a lot more that goes into it. And radio is very immediate. It's very in the moment. It's as if the person is talking directly to you. Unlike TV, it's just you. That's it. People always ask me, as far as the updates go, who wrote the scripts for you? And I'm like, that's all me. That's me. There aren't script writers here for, it's totally different. Where again, TV, there's a lot more that goes into the whole production. There's a much greater staff, but radio, it's just you and the microphone and the people you're talking to. And I think maybe it's subconscious. I can't really explain it, but maybe that comes across.
Right, most definitely. And for me growing up, I would say when it came to radio, different people I listened to. I mean, I really enjoyed like people like Vin Scully. I will even go as far back as to say I loved listening to Spencer Ross. I know that's a name from the past, but he was really good. Was there anybody in radio that you really enjoyed listening to when you were a young kid, like high school, somewhere around there?
It is one person. That list starts with one person, and I don't want to say one person only, but definitely Marv Albert. And I was lucky enough to grow up when he was doing radio for the Knicks. He eventually moved to TV in 1986, but he did the road games on TV on Channel 9 in New York. But when I first started listening to the Knicks on the radio, it was Marv, and Marv had that distinct voice. Also, the tone, and there was an intensity in his voice. You knew when something was happening. Every game always felt like a big event, but you could hear the crescendo and him build to the big moment, and that always stood out to me. You always knew what it was, and there were a lot of great announcers that when I grew up, but Marv was the guy, and really it starts and ends there a little. Another guy I always liked, although he wasn't a play-by-play guy, was Tony Kubek on Game of the Week.
Yeah.
Tony was incredible in terms of his knowledge of the game and how things worked, and he'd tell you things before they happened, and it was phenomenal. I was always a big Dick Enberg fan when it came to TV. I loved seeing him on the big game and hearing the "oh my." I always loved that. And when Vin Scully started doing national games for NBC, I always liked that too. But Marv is really at the top of the list for me.
Yeah, and there's not a better voice you could kind of emulate more than Marv. I mean, he was just one of the best. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rich. Wasn't his brother Kenny your college roommate?
His son Kenny, yes.
Son Kenny. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Kenny
son
and I
Kenny.
have been friends since we went to summer camp in 1979. So we know each other since we're 11 and still very close to this day.
Yeah, and I mean, you went to New York University. Was that where you attended, Rich? And
yes, and Kenny was not only my bunkmate in summer camp, but my roommate in college. So we went through 4 years of school together. I didn't really. A lot of kids will now go to Syracuse for the Newhouse School, which is an outstanding school. I didn't really know much about Syracuse. I mean, I knew what they had produced, and I knew that the school was popular with Ted Koppel, Bob Costas, Marv, to name a few. But I didn't really think that Syracuse was the right place for me. And certainly some family situations dictated some things that were important to me at that time in my life. So I liked being in the city. I had a brother who fortunately went to Columbia. That was a little above me, but I liked NYU, and I thought it could be a very good springboard. It was a good school and a springboard for what I was hoping to do with my life. As I said, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it when I got to college, but I thought being in New York, being around the New York media, I thought something would come about.
Right. Now, you had a stop in Charlotte for like a cup of coffee. That didn't really work out. But I think you were in Washington for a couple of years. And
yes, I was.
And you loved being in Washington. I mean, you would have probably stayed there, if like the other opportunities didn't come. But just talk about being in Charlotte and Washington to start.
Well, it's funny because what happened was I was 23 years old. I was looking for a job. I had been working. Somebody had bought before I got to Charlotte. Somebody I knew bought airtime on WFAS in Westchester, and we did an overnight show for several months. That was pretty good. I like to think, and as a matter of fact, today is the 35th anniversary of the first show. But that ended. The money ran out, and I was left with tapes, and that was a great thing. And I just decided, I grew up in New York. I went to school in New York. And at that time in the industry, you really had to go outside of New York to cut your teeth and get some experience. And I thought that's really what I needed. So what I did was I sent out 100 tapes and resumes to places I thought I might like to live. And the next day, I got a call from a program director in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he hired me on the spot. And I said, "Great." And it was kind of interesting because I remember about like a half hour after getting that call and thinking to myself, "Wow, I'm moving to Charlotte. This is pretty big." But I loved it there. The people were incredible. They were so nice. I'll never forget their hospitality and how warm they were, and I'll never forget the blue skies. I wish it would have lasted longer, but a few months in, the station went under. So, but from there, I had more tape, and I knew, again, people from the New York area. Andy Poland had worked at WFAN, and I knew somebody who had been working at WFAN at the time, Eric Spitz, who knew Andy. WTEM in Washington started. They needed people. I sent a tape. Andy said, "Okay, let's go." I had a recommendation from Eric Spitz, who he valued his opinion, and he said, "Let's give it a shot, see how it goes." And it worked out really, really well. Unfortunately, the station, which is still in operation, never really took off the way that we had hoped. And so I thought I don't want to say this in any condescending manner, but I thought it was time for a change for me. At that point, I loved it. I love the people I work with. I'm still very close with many of them to this day. I did love the area. It was very close to New York. There were a lot of New Yorkers at the time. And it was a pretty good sports scene. It was a little different than New York, but it was pretty good. And from there, I went to Chicago, and I spent 2.5 years there. The winters were very, very difficult. And, again, I was getting into my late 20s at that point, and my whole life was in New York, but I was in Chicago. So ultimately, I made the decision to come back to New York and see how the chips fall.
Right. And interestingly enough, Rich, like anything else, somebody, like, say, for instance, somebody who listened to WFAN forever, that's always a goal for them to get to WFAN or a station in New York, a sports station. But that you sometimes have to go to different places. We mentioned Mike and the Mad Dog earlier. I believe Chris was actually all over the place before
Yeah.
he got to New York. He was in Florida. I know that. So you have to kind of move around a little bit. Steve Sommers, he was in San Francisco for a long time.
Yes.
And Sacramento. I mean, so you have to kind of move around. And I think, though, that helps you become a better person in radio because you're at different radio stations and you kind of see just how the business really works.
Well, the one thing I do take from my time is the score in Chicago was totally different than anything I had ever been a part of previously or heard previously. And they really kind of set the standard for what's now becoming very popular. And it's the every guy talk. And the guy who was at the center of that sensation was a guy by the name of Mike North. Who had owned a hot dog stand and was a huge sports fan. And, much like Joe Meningo in New York, had captured the ear of somebody, in his position that could hire. And they said, let's give it a shot. And it worked out well. But for me, on a personal level, what moving around did was it allowed me to find my voice and gain a lot of confidence. We always talk about in sports, rookies developing or prospects developing, and it's the same way in broadcasting. I needed experience, and I'll be honest, I did not love the way that I sounded for about 2 years. I used to really struggle with it because I'd listen back to my tapes and I would say to myself, that's not the way I think it's supposed to sound. And finally, one day in Chicago, I said, that's it. I got it. I don't know what I did or what I didn't do, but that's when I realized that was the way I wanted it to sound. And from then on, it's that's been my career. Again, don't ask me how to explain what the transformation was. I don't know, but maybe it was just the experience, and it just manifested in that one day, and we've been off and running since.
Right. And Rich, if the story is correct, your good friend Kenny, obviously, he had gotten engaged while you were in Chicago, and then you came back to New York, and then you ended up being back in New York permanently after going there to see Kenny, correct?
There's those events coincided,
Yeah.
but Kenny's engagement was one of those things I previously mentioned. Every part of my life was back in New York, and I was in Chicago, and that kind of struck a chord with me because I wasn't there to celebrate, and that really hurt. So at that point, I think the seeds are starting to plant for me that I wanted to be back in New York, and shortly thereafter, I did return. So Kenny subsequently got married about a year after the engagement, and a few months after that, I wound up moving back to New York. So that was a factor. That wasn't the reason, but certainly that was a factor, and it wound up happening that way. And Eric Spitz, who I mentioned just a couple of moments ago, had given me a recommendation for WTEM in Washington. He was part of the hiring team at the time at WFAN. He was very close with Kenny, and I knew Eric well. And part of it was that Eric and Mark Chernoff, who later hired me at WFAN, had told me, well, we would certainly use you if you were in New York, but we don't have anything that would say, please move back at this time. It would be freelance work. And I just, at that point, I thought to myself, well, if I'm not there, I'm never going to be there. So that was really ultimately why I decided to move back to New York. There were a lot of things in my personal life, such as the engagement, as you mentioned, that played a part. But professionally, I just felt this was the place I needed to be, or else I was never going to be here. And if it didn't work out, then, I was still young enough to find something, but I felt that was very important. So, and I started as a freelancer on August 5th, 1997. I went into train with John Minko, and he was relieved that I knew how that the computer system worked, because I'd had experience with it, and of course I knew the format, so he didn't really have to tell me anything. I knew what the updates were supposed to sound like backwards and forwards. It was just a matter of, where do I find the public service announcements that we do, or does somebody tell you those things? So really I needed very little assistance once I walked into the station, because I had known everything from listening and made it a point to listen. So but I started August 5th, and in December, Mark Chernoff had called me and asked me if I was interested in a full-time job, and I didn't have to think, for more than 5 seconds about it. It was I joked with Mark recently because it was the anniversary of that phone call, and I still remember. I don't even know what I was doing up, but I happened to be up at 8 o'clock in the morning on a day off, and the phone rang, and it was him, and he said to me, "If I offered you a full-time job, would you accept?" And I said, "Yeah." And that's how it all started. Really wasn't anything more than that.
And it's really remarkable, Rich. And think about your first full year at WFAN. I would say 1998 was your first full year. The Yankees have that unbelievable run. They win 125 games. The Knicks and the Heat are having another, battle in the playoffs where there's another fight that breaks out. And then you've got the Jets, who were having this magical run. Vinny Testaverde had a tremendous year. They almost get to the Super Bowl. The point I make is to be on the radio, to be doing the 2020s, which we'll talk about in a second. I mean, there was so much going on in New York at that time. I mean, your first full year, it was probably as exciting of a year as you could ever have.
Yeah, we had the good fortune of a lot of the New York teams doing well. And to me, the biggest thing that part of that year was Memorial Day weekend or Friday of Memorial Day weekend, when the Mike Piazza trade came down. I was fortunate enough to be on the air that day. And then you may remember there was a lot leading up to that. It was a whole week because Piazza was traded to the Marlins, and they were not intent on keeping him. And at first the Mets didn't seem interested, and this is where I really think Mike and the Mad Dog shined among their biggest moments. They really, I think the fact that they really hammered the Mets for not wanting to spend the money and go out and get them at that point, and the fan reaction, I really think that played a big part in the Mets changing their tune and going out and getting them. So to me, I'll never forget that. You figure, okay, it's a slow Friday afternoon, Memorial Day weekend, and right smack in the middle of it, it was about 2:30, I think, when that trade came down, and I was like, wow, and I mean, the Mets did not have an offensive player like that since Darryl Strawberry left. So I thought that was an enormous trade, and again, the part the station played in that, I thought those two things are to this day very memorable. But you're right. I mean, it was a fun ride. I mean, look, New York has 9 teams. They're not all going to do well, but at that point in time, most of them were. The Rangers were in the beginning of a very bad stretch, one of their worst stretches in franchise history. But the Devils were in the middle of a Stanley Cup run as well. They had won previously in '95, and again not too long after that, added 2 more.
Right. And Rich, let me ask you this. I'm going to get to the 2020, doing all that stuff, but I wanted to ask you this because you brought up Piazza. What was your feelings about the Mets letting Pete Alonso go? Did you think it was a terrible move? So many Met fans that I talked to, they did not like it. They were upset by it. They all, I've seen guys on the fan, Peter Hoffman, who just is so upset with David Stearns for just letting him get away. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, did you understand why the Mets did it, or do you think it was a bad job by them?
I understand it. I didn't agree with it. I know what Pete Alonso isn't, but I also know what Pete Alonso is. And maybe they think that he's going to age very quickly. I think that may be a concern, but I think it's very rare to find guys who are homegrown, who can shine in New York, hitting in the middle of the lineup, and hitting 35 plus home runs consistently while playing every day. Now, obviously, there is the thought and the notion that Alonso's going to have to become more of a designated hitter starting this year. We'll see how that plays out with the Orioles. But I thought the fact that this guy produced under pressure and he's a homegrown guy, he's a right-handed bat. It's a hard thing to find. I was not on board with it also because I still think, yeah, Pete Alonso may age, but a 5-year deal, he's going to be 31. You should get, at least next season, you should get comparable numbers to what he's put up and, probably similar numbers for the next maybe 2 to 3 years. And maybe years 4 or 5 of that deal may not come out, but I think that's any deal right now. But they have their reasons, and I know they did a lot of research on it. It was not a decision that was made frivolously, but I think that only time will tell if it was the right decision or not. I think they obviously wanted to change the mix of the team. Jorge Polanco is a solid player, a good character guy. Marcus Semien, the same. But it's tough to see the guys that come up through the system. There haven't been too many of them, and have a great deal of success like Alonso has, and see them just walk away. And especially the big moments he has provided. I think that is a very tough thing for fans to get over, and it puts a lot of pressure on the Mets. So we'll see how it turns out for everybody involved.
Yeah, the one thing, Rich, like the thing I didn't, not the excuse, but the kind of reasoning why they broke up the team is because the team kind of collapsed. They didn't make the playoffs, but it was really a matter of one game. So what happens if they win that last game of the year? They go to the playoffs, maybe they win the first round. Is their thinking still going to be that they have to basically reset the team? That was the only thing. Like, I thought that was a little, like, that wasn't like a good example of why you should break up the team, because I mean, listen, there can only be one world champion, and there could only be, a National League and an American League champion. So, like, I mean, a lot of times guys you have on your team that help you win, most of the time, they're not going to win a World Series. That's how baseball is. So I just thought that was not the best reasoning for why they broke up the team.
I understand your point, but I think everything is fluid. I think that good teams win those games that the Mets didn't win. Yes, they were not very far removed, not even one season from making a tremendous run during the playoffs, and that really resonated with the fans. But I think, again, there comes a time when you have to say, this is not going to work going forward. And if you try, spending money to try to change it or try to improve it, and it doesn't work, then you're really stuck. I think the one thing you have to give David Stearns credit for is he does have a vision. He does have a plan. Whether you agree with it or not, that's totally up to you. But I think he thinks that this is the best way for this organization to go. And that's, again, time will tell. So, look, I think this team was flawed. It was getting a little older. You got to remember, too, Juan Soto has an opt-out after 5 years. So now we got 4 years of seeing him in Queens. And you also have Francisco Lindor, who's in his prime. So you really have to change on the fly and try to adapt. Again, I don't know how all these moves are going to work out, but it was clear that this was a flawed team, and bringing it back the way they had it, I think they saw as a mistake. And look, I think they could be right, but if you're going to commit to it, then you're in deeper, and then it's hard to get out of it.
Right. So, Rich, doing the 2020 flash, and it's a shame you don't really see that on WFAN anymore. But one of the things that people don't understand about what guys like yourself and John Minko and Joe Tollison and Sweeney Murdy and, Harris Allen, all these guys that have done the 2020s forever, is Bob Huessler. I apologize for forgetting him. But one of the things you guys really don't, you have to kind of put the material together, make sure that when you're reading it, it's presentable and professional the right way when you read it on the air. And you really, I think John Minko said it best, you really get 2 minutes to do your 2020. So there's not a lot of time, and you got to put all that information into 2 minutes. So it's a very challenging job that you have. It's not easy at all.
I always tried to be direct. That was what I thought was the best. Everybody has their own style. You know, Mink, we used to kid, never wrote with verbs. But you're going for the ear. You're not going for being grammatically correct. Bob was a little more conversational than I was, and John was. I'd probably put Joe in that same category. But I think you take whatever you can. For me, the way I always tried to do it was to try to have some foundation to report on. So if the Mets lost 4 in a row and their pitching was not well, I focused on that. If the Knicks had won 5 in a row and hadn't allowed more than 90 points, I would go on that, or try to also bring up some historical reference too. So to me, there was always something. There was always a theme to there was the game. There was a theme to the game, and depending on the time of day, there was something else. Whether somebody was not going to play that night, or I used to think when you were doing nighttime updates around the games, there was the storyline going into the game, the storyline that developed during the game, and the result, and here's why they won or lost. So, if Mike Piazza facing his former team for the first time, his current team, he has sparked them to a 4-game winning streak, and they'll look to continue that tonight at Shea Stadium, and or they did look to continue whatever the time frame was, and the Mets beat the Dodgers by a score of 6-2. Piazza, leading the way with 3 hits, including his 21st home run of the season. That was always, you tried to tie those things together as best you could.
Right. And the other thing too, Rich, for a 2020 update guy, when he or she is getting ready to go on the air, so say they're doing Joe Beningo's overnight show at 1 a.m., they're getting there like sometimes 10 or 11 o'clock to prepare, so that they don't just get in the chair and give the update. They're there 2 or 3 or 4 hours before they actually go on the air. So a lot of people think, oh, it's the best. It is a great job, don't get me wrong, but it's not just 3 hours of updates. Like, you're doing a lot of preparation way before you even grab the mic.
Yeah, people would often ask me, like, what do you do? And I'd explain, and like, oh, great, you only work 6 minutes an hour. I'm like, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
I used to get in, usually I was very early. I like being there rather than I'm in traffic or I'm battling it. I like to be at my desk, relaxed, ready to go. Harris was very much like that too. But I would usually get in an hour and a half to 2 hours before lay everything out. Here's if it was a day shift, here's who's playing tonight, here's what could be coming up. If it was a night shift, again, that changes so much because you used to get in like 5 o'clock. So, the game would start at 7. So here's what's coming up tonight. And then here's what's happening right now. And, obviously the scores and the results.
Right. So, Rich, let me ask you this too. As you're doing these updates, listen, there's always room for improvement. Like, did you used to listen to different updates on the station just to see, if there's anything like, we talk about John Minko, and I think it's very important for everybody to understand that, like, if Babe Ruth was to me, John Minko, when it came to updates, he was that guy that like everybody kind of, looked up to because he was there from the very beginning. So, I mean, did you go to John a lot for advice and things like that?
I think we all used to talk. We used to bounce things off each other. You all, what did you lead with? Why? I also think too, we all listened so much and we were so in tune with everything. I think a lot of it was just understood. I didn't think a lot needed to be spoken. But we talk about things, what to lead with, why'd you lead with this? There was always a conversation. Oh, I think this is more important. Oh, this has to be the lead. So there were times about that. So I think we always had, everybody always had a very good relationship with each other. That was one thing. We used to bust each other's chops certainly a lot. But that was, in the newsroom, which now doesn't exist, unfortunately, anymore. That was where really there was so much that happened in the newsroom that ultimately would filter on the air. I mean, Mike and Chris would talk in the newsroom a lot. Chris was always very chatty, like to get everybody's opinions and debate and argue, and sometimes those spilled out over the air. But the newsroom, we would often talk, especially if a story came up as they were going to commercial break. Hey, this just happened, and then it became a big conversation in the newsroom. So those are a lot of things that were a lot of fun. I mean, it was. I don't want to say it was intense, but we were all on the same page of what was happening and our opinions on it.
Yeah, and Rich, you never know what could come out of something you do. Now, you were the update guy, and you just happened to be on Mike and the Mad Dog, and Dog and Mike, they would do this to everybody, whether it was Continent, whether it was Malusis. Even Mike did it to Chris. He had that Dog's Day to win a date with Dog. Well,
Yep.
They were talking about your date in life, and Regis Philman, who happened to go to your gym, the same gym as you, he would listen all the time. Regis had what was called the ACK, right? I think it was
Project
called.
ACK, yeah.
Yeah.
That actually started 16 years ago this week.
Here's the thing. You were on WFAN doing 2020 updates, and it turned into like a 2-month thing with Regis and Kathy Lee. I mean, that had to be something that's got to be a highlight of your career.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I never went to that. It's a funny story how it all happened, but I knew Regis at the gym, and we talked all the time, and usually it was about baseball or Notre Dame football, and he was always looking out for me, trying to get me a date. And he'd call over if he saw a girl, he'd just call her over. Hey, how are you? What's your name? And he'd try to introduce her to me. And sometimes they were married, so it's like, no, not her. Can't happen. But I remember this one particular day, and it was 16 years ago. We were just sitting there, and out of the blue, he just slams his fist on the table and he goes, "I'm going to get you a date on the show." And I'm like, first I was like, what did he just say? And then he just kept repeating it. "I'm going to get you a date on the show." And I'm like, no, I'm totally fine. Don't worry about it. And he just would not take no for an answer. The more I resisted, the more he insisted. And sure enough, the next morning he goes on the show and he starts talking about it. I'm like, oh my God, I am in trouble now. And I was just kind of hoping at first it would go away. And usually the phone would light up as soon as he mentioned me on the air. And for some reason, it didn't on this special day, at least not for a little while. And then all of a sudden, like 9:45, 10 o'clock, the calls just kept coming one after another after another. And then he called me and he said, "So, were you watching the show?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was watching." and then his voice changed a little. He said, "Look, I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do, but I think this might be a good thing for you. So, why don't you take it over, take the night, think it over, and let me know. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. I won't bring it up again. We're all good. But if you want to do it, I think this might be fun." And I was the only one who didn't want to do it. Every one of my friends wanted me to do it, and I'm thinking to myself, why? I don't get it. Why am I the only one that doesn't think this is a good idea? And I'd asked my mother about it, and my mother had, for everybody's opinion, my mother had the absolute veto power. If she didn't think, if she had any hesitation, I wouldn't have done it. But I called her and I said, "Yeah, everybody thinks I should do this." And she was so certain about it. She says, "Oh, you should definitely do it." I'm like, "Huh?" And I was like, "Oh, if she says it, then it must be me." I said, and then I thought about things too, and I really didn't think about it in terms of trying to make myself a bigger name or anything like that. I just thought it was an experience that was unique, and nobody gets to do this. And if I say no, this opportunity is never going to come back. And I also thought too, at the time, Regis was, in his later years in the show, and I knew time was precious. And again, it's not like this is going to come back. So it's either now or never. You do it or you don't do it. And for once in my life, I said, let's live outside the box a little and change things up. And it was a really fun, unique experience. I can't. It's hard to explain unless you're in it. But you're in such a whirlwind, and all the attention, you just soak it all in, and then all of a sudden it stops. and it was strange because at first I really wasn't very interested in it, but you get in it and you're like, this is fun. This is very nice. This is unique. And you're meeting people and people recognize you on the street, and it really just becomes such a whirlwind, and then it just comes to an end and you're yesterday's news. So, but it was great. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad he pushed me to do it. And I miss him dearly. He was the all-time greatest.
Yeah, and the thing about him is I just always felt like with all the success he had, he still remembered what it was like to be the little guy. You know, the guy
No
that
question.
had to work. He never forgot that, and he was always willing to help anybody. And another guy I wanted to bring up to you, Rich, because I think like he always did a great job of like getting the listeners to know who Joe Tollison was, who Rick Ackerman was, who John Minko was Don Imus. He was very good about always mentioning everybody on his show. If I remember correctly, he used to always talk about how you were cleansy with like cleaning stuff, right? And spraying everything down. Yeah. So like he did that so people would know who Rick Ackerman was and like why it's important to make sure that everybody knew everybody that worked on that station. I always thought that was a good job by him because I felt like even if he was like taking little shots at people during his show and like making fun of them, he was also doing it in a way where he wanted people to, you know, very much see the type of work they put in.
Well, it was part of the fabric of the station. It became fodder for the show. So it also became something that was very amusing. And I think it showed the depth of the station. So I think that was a very, very important thing. And obviously, he launched a lot of careers. He was one of a kind, a legend. And there was never a dull moment when he was in the house. That's for sure. You're always on edge. But at the end of the day, it was all about the show and all in good fun.
Right. So, Rich, let me ask you, you did so many updates. I mean, like countless updates, but tell me some of the memorable updates that you did, whether it doesn't matter if you were doing middays, afternoon drive, overnights. I mean, because with all the stuff that went on with sports in your lifetime working at that station, there has to be some memorable moments that stand out to you.
As I mentioned, the Mike Piazza trade, that's probably number one. Number two, being on after the Mets defeated the Reds in that play-in game in '99 to make the playoffs. That was tremendous. I just remember us all sitting on edge all night long, and every pitch. The other thing too was the Subway Series, because that was a 2-week period where we were it was 24/7 and everybody was on every game. Obviously it started slowly in the playoffs, but the Mets, start winning, and it looks like it's going to be a reality. And of course, then it becomes a reality. And it was the Mets against the mighty Yankees, who were in the middle of their dynasty, and it was tremendous. I mean, I remember all of us after we were just so exhausted after all that happened, and I remember. Just you could just tell, like, everybody put all their energy into it, and the day or two after, you could just look around and it was like all the air came out of the balloon at that point. Obviously the series was over. It was on the football season at that point, but we were all just so exhausted from everything that everybody had put into it. And the other thing that stands out was covering Super Bowl 42, and how much everybody put into the Giants run. When you get those types of things, I wasn't there, unfortunately, in the spring of '94 when the Knicks and Rangers were going to the Stanley Cup Finals and NBA Finals respectively. I remember listening and hearing how Mike and Chris would be flying back and forth, and Dog flew by himself to one event and Mike would stay at another. It was just that I can't imagine what it was like, because I remember what it was like for the Subway Series and the Giants Super Bowl. Those events consume you. I mean, it's like everything else takes second place when those things are happening, and that is really what's in the forefront.
Right. And Rich, I was thinking about this as well. There was a time where you couldn't talk about sports and you had to really focus on the real life things that were going on. And I know there were guys doing updates when 9/11 happened for a few days. Talk to me about how difficult that was and the emotion with that, because I mean, it felt like I'll give you a good example. September 10th, I remember the Giants were playing Denver, and the Yankees were supposed to play the Red Sox. Roger Clemens was trying to win his he was going to try to start the year 20-1, so it was going to be a big night. The Yankee game gets rained out, and then the next day the tragedy that happens. And I just felt like it was amazing to me, because Monday, where everything felt so normal to me, Wednesday morning, I just felt like it was a whole different world. And I felt that way for such a long time too. So just talk about how difficult that was being on the air back then.
Yeah, I just remember in the days following that, really, you didn't know where everything was going. You just knew that we had this big void, this tremendous sadness, absolutely, an overwhelming loss. And where are we going? How are we going to heal? I don't think anybody was actually thinking about when games would come back, but it's one of those things that you're just living in the moment. You talk about radio, as we mentioned previously, being in the moment, and that was one of those things, because even from from my standpoint, update to update. I mean, unfortunately, I remember at the time there wasn't anything to update. Obviously, there was no sports, and we're updating. We became a news station. That's one thing I still remember. Had a professor in college by the name of Michael Ludlam who talked to me about doing news, and I told him I had absolutely no interest in it. And I said, because in news, you aspire to cover the war. In sports, you aspire to cover the Super Bowl. And he said, that's one thing, but he said, you're going to be called upon some point in your career to cover news. And that was one of those cases. And that was really, what was going on, what, rescue crews and recovery crews were able to find at the World Trade Center. Mayor Giuliani going to remember whoever had perished that day. There were all things along those lines. And we all knew people who had passed away in that tragedy. So we were just really reporting on whatever we could to kind of take what the news stations were doing and just put a different angle on it. And if it related to sports in some way, then we connected that. But that was a very difficult time, again, because of the loss that we had. How were we going to respond to that? How were we going to recover? What was going to happen next? And although it was not a priority, I think people did wonder, like, when are we going to get back to normalcy and what we remembered? It was it was a good 10 days before that happened. So that was a very difficult time. Sandy was another, when everything around here was out, so there was nothing to report on, and you're just doing cancellations and what the teams are doing as far as helping and relief efforts. And so you become a little bit of a news reporter. It changes. There's no question about it. Those are the toughest. Even in sports, the toughest stories I always found were when somebody passes away, because you have a 2-minute update, and that that'll take up a minute, maybe even a minute and a half, depending on who the person is. But you have to find a way to encapsulate their life in such a short amount of time that it's very difficult. You wrestle with a lot of emotions. You wonder if you did enough job capturing their life and paying tribute. Was it enough? Should you have done more? Could you have done it a different way to make them honor their memory? So all those things go together. And I've always had, the sadness is always the toughest thing to report on.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it was a terrible time. And Rich, as time went on over your years with WFAN, you kind of transitioned to CBS Sports. And I just don't understand this, Rich. It's not just WFAN. It seems to be everywhere. They're drifting away from like the sports updates, which I think are so important. And Mark Chernoff, I think one of the first things he did when he became program director is he implemented the 2020 flash.
Yes.
He was a big proponent of it. And he was the type of guy too. Like, I mean, Benigno's talked about it many times. He would yell at Benigno if he wasn't getting to that flash on time.
Yep.
That was something that Mark wanted. Why do you think radio stations, sports stations in general, are trying to kind of move away from that? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think because a lot of people will tell you they get information from their phones now. I still think there's a very big value in having the updates, but I think given this day and age where you have updates on the telephone, people don't get their news from the traditional sources that we did growing up, and I think it's a very difficult thing. And also the fact that I think at least a lot of stations are having trouble financially, so it's one way to cut costs. I think they are a very good thing. I think they should be a necessary thing, but obviously, I'm not running the show. I think if you do it in a certain way, as we had been doing it for all these years, I think it becomes part of the fabric of the station. I think also when there's a story, people tune in to hear how we cover it, not just the talk. And I also think too that it's sort of it's sort of a vehicle. If a host is going on a certain topic and goes to one extreme, I think the fact that the updates were always objective, I think that kind of gives it a little break and reels it back in for a couple of moments, and then the host of the show could reintroduce their opinion or even a different opinion. So I always thought it was a necessary part of the day. I thought that it's again something that should be done, but stations or companies now either view it as a luxury or unnecessary. So that's the unfortunate part of the business.
Right. And Rich, let me ask you, obviously your 29 years at the station recently came to an end. Number one, how difficult was that? Because that's a long time. That's almost like, it is a big part of your life. And number two, what could we expect for Rich Ackerman in 2026?
Well, to answer your second question, I'm not sure yet. I hope it's something good. I hope that it'll be back somewhere very soon. But it's it's not easy leaving somewhere. I think the hardest part is the routine. There are people, and especially it's a very, WFAN and Odyssey was a unique place where everybody had been for such a long time. So over the years, one or two people would leave, but you still see them, whether it was Chris, you run into them at a game or a Super Bowl or whatever the case may be. But the people that I had been a part of for so long, and even there are other people who have not been there as long, but have come up through the ranks and had been there for at least a decade. Greg Giannotti, Eddie Scazzeri, who I'd been with since day one, John Schweibecker, the same. Suddenly, Jerry Recco is another. Suddenly, you're not going to see these people nearly as often. Certainly not every day. So I think the disruption in the routine is the hardest part. But in the end, you say, you know what? It was a unique run. Not many people can say that. I never thought I'd be at the company for 28 years. I can tell you that. I thought I'd be 2, 3, and turned out into a lifetime. But I understood the changes in the business and the changes that were coming. And so it didn't catch me by surprise. But the hardest part, again, is saying goodbye to the people that you've been with for so long. And now the people that have been there, Chris McMonigal has been there at least 15 years. I don't really remember the exact start date. Sean Morash has been there 15 years. Evan Roberts, 20 years still. So there's still a lot of people with great longevity there that, again, you see them every day. And now suddenly you're not going to see them every day. It takes a little getting used to.
And it's crazy you brought up Chris. He's been gone for 17 years. It doesn't feel like it, but he has. I think when all is said and done, he's going to have more years at Sirius Radio than he will at FAN. And
I once said to Chris, he's had a remarkable career. It's like Joe Torre, who is arguably a Hall of Fame player, and the run that he had as a manager. And even another baseball example is John Smoltz, who had this brilliant career as a starting pitcher and then briefly was a reliever and was at the top of his game as a reliever. So yeah, Chris reinvented himself, if you even want to call it that. But he's had a Hall of Fame career. It was a pleasure to be around him. We always had a lot of fun. I don't get a chance to talk to him as much because he has a wife and 4 kids and a show and a whole life, and we don't live near each other, but we catch up every so often, or I'll text him and say, hey, how's it going, or something like that. And but yeah, he hats off to him. He lives it. He's one of these people that if it wasn't his job, he'd still be doing it anyway.
Oh yeah,
It
definitely.
wasn't about the money. He always likes talking. He always likes being around people, and I think you see that every day.
Definitely. So, Rich, let me ask you before we go. What would you say to the fans who obviously heard your updates for all those years, those 30 years? Myself included. What would you say to those fans that always kept up and to this day still remember you with such fondness?
Well, mostly, thank you. The fans, the listeners are the people that are the most important. Those are the people that you're reaching. Those are your friends. So many called the station in the early years, and some of whom have unfortunately passed, like Doris and Rego Park or Short Al. Um, Al from White Plains, I always loved when he called. Mike from Montclair, those guys, Dennis from Yonkers. I mean, there were so many people. I mean,
Jerome
these
from
people,
Manhattan.
Jerome, of course, and a funny moment from Jerome that I always use. He once, I don't remember who the player was, but he was yelling and screaming. He goes, "I don't like him. He's done, done." DOEN done.
Yeah.
And I remember when he did that, I lost it, and I always repeat that. I go whenever I go done, DOEN done. But these
Yeah.
people are part of your lives, and and that's really special. I can't tell you how many times people walked up to me on the street and started talking to me and said hello, and I'd wonder, like, I don't recognize this person. I don't know where I know them from, and I realized I don't know them. They know me. They know my personality from the station. That was always a great thing. I was always flattered by that. But there was a moment there where you're like, I feel terrible. I don't know who this person is. I'm like, yeah, I don't know who this person is. But it's then you realize, oh, this is why they recognize you and they want to say hello and they want to talk, and that was a wonderful thing. And I always appreciate that. That was never lost on me.
Well, Rich, this was a lot of fun for me, a real honor. First off, congratulations on all the years that you provided fans like myself and WFAN in general. I mean, you have an indelible legacy there that'll last forever. I mean, you just came to work every day, did your job, and I really applaud you because you gave us the very best. And I always look for those 2020 sports updates because there might be something I'd miss, especially like, when I was on overnights at my job, it was important because you didn't always get that information. And guys like yourself, John Minko, Joe Tollison, Bob Huessler, you guys provided that. So I really do applaud you for all the work you've done. And you really are, like I said, an indelible part of WFAN forever.
As I said, don't make me cry. I thank you. I thank you. I'm touched. I'm flattered. Everything that can be said that is good, I'm feeling that right now. So it's nice to know that you made an impact. It's nice to know what you did, affected people in a good way, and maybe enhanced their lives. I don't want to say that I'm a doctor curing an incurable disease or anything like that. But it's nice to know that you made some kind of mark, and that's special. That really is. So I thank you for your support, for listening, for your kind words and reaching out. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Rich. And there you have it, folks. In any type of work you do, and let's just mention baseball, you have your start and pitching staff. They go out there and you want them to throw at least 6 or 7 innings. But then there's those guys that you need to come out of the bullpen to close it down. You really need them to be there to make sure that you preserve the lead. That's kind of how I always looked at the guys at WFAN. You had your Mike and the Mad Dog. They were going to open up strong and do a tremendous job. You had Don Imus, Joe Beningo, Steve Sommers, all these great talk show hosts. But then there's the guys I would call in the bullpen, the Rick Ackermans, the John Minkos, the Joe Tollisons, Bobby Huesslers, Harris Allens, Erica Herskowitz, Sweeney Murdy, all those guys, because they play an important role. Because without them, we don't get the updates. We don't hear that Mike Piazza went to the Mets. We don't hear that the Yankees landed Alex Rodriguez, or we don't hear that the New York Knicks got Carmelo Anthony. It's because of these guys and the dedication and commitment they do, especially Rich, working endlessly, countless hours to bring us the very best of the 2020 sports flash, to give us sports updates that we desperately need. And they gave us an escape from life. That's what I always look at as well, because with the sports updates, with the sports talk shows, all that stuff, it made us feel like we were, fans listening, but we were also part of their family. And that's how I always felt. And it should never go unnoticed, the impact that Rich Ackerman had, not only on WFAN, but radio in general. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.